due process of law. So Stan, what is due process and why is it so important?
Well, it's important because you don't want to take something from somebody without them being able to defend themselves to keep what they have. We are guaranteed life, liberty, and property. And so to take it, you have to have a due process or a fair hearing that gives them notice of what you've done wrong or whatever it is that they're trying to do, what they're trying to take, and you have an opportunity to defend yourself in court. So due process is all the technicalities of notice, when to be there, what the issues are, so that you're prepared when you go in there and be able to argue your case. That's due process.
Steve?
Yeah, and just to add one thing to that, one of the fundamental foundations of our law historically has been, Dr. Dan, you're innocent until you're actually proven guilty. And the onus must be on, whether it's the government, law enforcement, or whatever that's bringing a charge, it's their responsibility to prove that a crime has actually been committed. Up until that point, you are totally innocent, and they have to go through the due process. We cannot negotiate on that right, and lose that mentality. I'm innocent until I'm proven guilty, and it's a very, very fundamental part of foundation of our rights and laws that we can't negotiate on.
I want you to take your time in answering this question. No one's running the clock, as you know. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, our nation has been locked down. The government decided what businesses are not essential and forced them to close. People have been literally forced to remain in their homes. The professional practices of physicians have been altered. Strict rules for interpersonal actions have been instituted. The penalties for disobedience, while they're variable from state to state, can include citations, fines, and in some cases, arrest. Now, civil libertarians would take the position that all these restrictions are unconstitutional, and that while the government could have taken reasonable steps to protect the most vulnerable, the rest of us should have been allowed to assess our own risk posed by the disease and live life as we choose. As a Georgia legislator, how would you have advised the governor to proceed with these executive orders? What would you have done differently? And what would your plan be to reopen the state? Steve?
You said I could take my time.
Yes. But he can take his time.
Something stalling for you, Stan. The first thing that comes to my mind is that hindsight is always 20/20. What any of us would have done if we had been in Governor Kemp's position or even President Trump's position would have been a challenge. But it's becoming more and more clear that once the main concern in the beginning, if we all will remember, is that we did not want our healthcare system to be overwhelmed. This thing apparently was very contagious. It looked like anybody that was exposed was going to come down with it, and we didn't realize whether, how sick they would become, what needs they would need. But going forward, it has become very, very apparent that it is now time I think people are educated, and we need to maintain the personal responsibility. When Governor Kemp began opening up the businesses, he began to receive a lot, some criticism from some standpoints. The interesting thing it didn't seem to occur to some people, he was not forcing everyone to go visit these establishments. They could still stay at home if they wanted to. But those that felt like they had weighed the risk, were willing to try to love their neighbor as much as they love themselves, be considerate of others' needs and considerations. it really has become a scary thing that as we look back on this, we're going to have to really think about, could this have been, or could this lead to a blueprint that will infringe on our freedoms? The interesting thing about freedom is that it's not guaranteed. As Ronald Reagan said many years ago, we are always only one generation away from waking up one day and realizing our freedoms are gone. We can't negotiate on that. And we need to emphasize personal responsibility, personal concern, but it's not the government's responsibility to really tell me how to live or not to live. And within parameters, of course. But I'm very concerned about how this could affect future freedoms if we're not careful.
Stan?
I would have advised the governor to make his executive order a minimum and leave it to local control if they needed to do more than what he had in his order. But he had in his order that that was the maximum and that you had to follow his rules. And I think it was too big a blanket across the state. Not everywhere was hit as hard. The state has police powers under the 10th Amendment, but they're very limited. They are there to deal with when you have an emergency for the safety and health of the public. And when they figured out that this disease, how it spreads, they're still working on that, but they have a better idea of how it spreads now and how contagious it is. And you have hot spots, and really those are the areas, in my mind, that should have been locked down severely until they had it under control. The scary part about the police powers is you don't want to let it go too long. It's there to protect the public, their safety, but don't let it be abused and grow into something that shouldn't be. And that's where I think we went wrong, is that we buckled down everything the same as if it was all the same, and it wasn't. And so people have to exercise personal responsibility and care for themselves. And I would have left the orders to be in the hands of local control, let them decide how far they needed to go.
In the United States, to date, we've had approximately 1.5 million cases of COVID, with 88,000 deaths. In Georgia, 36,600 cases and 1,557 deaths as of yesterday. The lives and livelihoods of over 30 million of our fellow citizens have been destroyed by the government response to the COVID-19 epidemic. We have added $5 trillion to our debt, and the end is really not in sight. What is or would be your plan to balance the health concerns of the population, true medical facts, the monetary and personal cost of the cure, the value of one life, and the legal requirements of the Constitution? Stan.
This is a protection of life versus protection of livelihoods question. And I think first you protect the life, and then you protect the livelihoods afterwards. It's back to what I was talking about, where you have the concentrations of the epidemic, then you have to take stronger measures. And you can open up parts of the state that weren't suffering as bad. I think our local numbers here were quite low, well under 100, probably well under 50. And I don't know if we had any deaths from it or not. So areas like this, people can take personal responsibility and care for themselves while we open things back up and let business get back to doing what it's supposed to be doing. That's how I view it. That's how I think it should have been handled.
Steve?
Yes, I will add to that it started to become a real problem in the fact that the, quote, cure was almost becoming worse than the disease. And yes, people were getting sick, but what they've discovered now is that a small percentage, very small percentage of people that actually have come down with it actually die. And they're not really dying because of the COVID, it was because of other pre-existing conditions. And so I think that once we realize there is a pandemic, we need to get the information out there. This is how you can protect yourself. But there comes a point where we have to get people back to work. And I'm out here talking, you know, what's interesting is that a lot of businesses were considered to be essential businesses, and they continued on. And what's interesting, even as busy as those grocery stores, the hardware stores, the nursery and plant businesses, everybody was at home, so they started doing home improvements. There really was not a spike. As much as those people were around each other, there probably was more mask wearing and maybe social distancing that was being enforced. But there came a point where we began to get a handle on it. We began to really, once the public became educated, getting those businesses back to business really does need to become a priority, because we are going to be hurting. There are a lot of people hurting, not because of the virus making them sick. It's because they're having a hard time putting food on their table. We've got to get people back to work.
Very good. The next section, First Amendment principles of free speech and assembly. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. First Amendment. So Stan, the First Amendment guarantees the right of free speech. If you believe these rights apply to publicly funded schools and universities, how would you protect those rights from unconstitutional limitation?
In the schools?
Yes, in universities.
Oh, in universities. Oh.
Schools and universities, places of education.
Okay. Well, I think the First Amendment is pretty clear. You can only restrict free speech when it endangers others. Yelling fire in a crowded room, okay? So, somebody that's wanting to talk on campus and people disagree with it, they still have to let them go and talk. I don't see how they can stop that. I'm not sure if I'm catching your question right, but your First Amendment rights are pretty strong. You can't just say anything where, like I said, it might harm somebody, but you can have the right to be very disagreeable.
Let me clarify that really for both of you. I'm sure you are aware that all of these movements on campus that do restrict free speech, okay, safe spaces, safe zones, hate speech, all of that stuff on campus, and when conservatives come to speak, there's rioting and all kinds of problems. I don't know how much of that is a problem in the state of Georgia, but obviously, if it were, because that's part of the university experience, how do you feel that should be handled by the government in Georgia?
Yeah. Well, they should put a stop to that kind of nonsense. People should have the right, if they're going to invite a speaker and some people on campus disagree with that, they should learn to tolerate it. This is America. You should have the right to speak. You can't just shut them down. If you're going to be violent and that kind of stuff, then kick them out of school. I mean, there's things that they can do to allow free speech, but it should be a priority of the colleges and our schools to allow for someone to speak their mind. That's what you're there for.
Steve? And these are, of course, are publicly funded universities, so that means taxpayer dollars.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what I was getting ready to say. They're getting taxpayer dollars, and the state does have a vested interest in making sure that the constitutional rights, not only of the U.S. Constitution, the Georgia Constitution, are upheld. But there is a real problem with this, Dr. Dan, in the fact that when some of these groups that tend to have a liberal view, if they encounter someone that they find has a conservative view, they don't want to just disagree. They want to shut them down and shut them up. And they don't want them to have a voice at all. And it's very important that we tell them and force them to understand they have just as much of a right to voice their conservative view as you do. You may not agree with it, but there does have to be this toleration, and there has to be. We need to have the atmosphere, especially on a college campus. There needs to be the atmosphere of a healthy debate of ideas. Let the best idea win, not just the one who has the loudest or most violent voice. Let them have the final say so. But this is a real problem on many of our campuses.
Since these are publicly funded institutions, would you suggest as legislators that you withhold funds or in some way force them through the use of funds?
That's a very important and very viable stick. It's the same thing that is being used against other institutions. Oh, well, you receive federal funds, therefore you've got to play by our federal rules. And but when we mention that, to protect conservative voices, a lot of times they don't want to hear that. And that's they need to be reminded that if they are receiving state funds, which they are, a large portion of our budget is going toward education on the college level, and so if they're going to continue to receive those funds, then they need to abide by the constitutional rights and protect constitutional rights. If they don't have the stomach to do that, then maybe there should be some consequences of withdrawing those funds.
Stan?
Withdrawing the funds is probably the only stick that will work to make them change and allow free speech.
Would you be willing to use that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, Steve, the First Amendment also protects the right of people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. If you are elected, what measures will you put in place to ensure that the needs and requests of individual constituents and groups of constituents are heard in a timely manner?
Well, they already have that right, and so basically to encourage them to do that, the key word is to peaceably assemble. And but if they have a grievance, they have every right to be able to assemble, and they need to be heard.
Stan?
If I'm hearing the question right, I agree with his answer.
Well, I was more interested in what would you set up as mechanisms in your office, in your offices, to make sure that your constituents can get a hold of you and talk with you if they need to?
My phone number is on my website and on my Facebook page. People have it. I've been using it out in the public since I started the campaign. I would continue to keep my contact information out there for people, hold town hall meetings so that they can come to me with their grievances or whatever. It would be those kind of things that I would do.
Exactly right, and sorry that I didn't understand the question totally, but absolutely, every legislator has to be constantly reminded and must remember. Many do, but we all need to remember we work for the people. They don't work for us, and we're there to serve them, and we've got to hear their voice. And so, with all the technology that we have today, it's wonderful. I love receiving a text, receiving an email, a phone call. All of that will be totally available, and I will do my best to get back to every single constituent, no matter what their concern is. I will respond as quickly as possible.
Okay, Stan, the First Amendment prohibits the government from making a law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So, two-part question. What religious expression is acceptable to you in public locations? And what constitutes the free exercise of religion? And are there any limits that you would accept?
On the free exercise, I wouldn't accept any limits on that. The type of speech, is that where you're headed with the religious speech? Is that?
Well, yes, religious expression in public places.
In public places, I wouldn't put any restrictions on that. I know the court system has done that, but I would be, as a legislator, fighting to put laws in place that allow people to pray, to exhibit things of their religion, stuff like that, I would fight for that.
Absolutely. Very likely all three of us probably remember a time when we actually had prayer and Bible reading in our school to start our school day, and as well as saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And there is nothing harmful about that in any way. It's actually very helpful. It's very interesting. I was just reading in Proverbs this morning. It says, by the fear of the Lord, a person departs from evil. We need to bring the Lord back into our public and governmental arena in every area. And I love it that we live in a place where people still love to stand and bow their heads and pray before a football game, and then have just a knockdown, drag-out game and at the end see those players all line up and shake each other's hands. It's just a wonderful thing. And those are values that we cannot lose.
Yes.
Well, I was going to add that our founding fathers designed our country for a moral people.
Mm.
And that we've kind of gotten away from that with our courts. And anyway, let
Yeah,
you respond,
amen.
but that's...
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where am I? Are you next?
I got
Doesn't matter.
Okay. So, drug addiction and its consequences are a major problem, devastating lives, families, and the budgets of state and local governments. What solutions do you propose to deal with this?
There just needs to be swift enforcement of our laws, and this is a real problem. Tell you a sad story. Stevens County is not in our district, but I have a lot of members and work there quite a bit through my National Rights Congressman job, and talked to a longtime Georgia state legislator, Jeanette Jameson. She actually has an intersection named after her. You may know Jeanette. Longtime Stevens County, Toccoa resident. She told me a very interesting story. She said, Steve, years ago, there was so much industry in Toccoa. And she said we could pride ourselves and we could tell these industries and these businesses, come to Toccoa, come to Stevens County, because we have a great work ethic, and we have fantastic people that will give you an honest day's job. She says, Steve, a lot of those jobs have left. And she said one of the main reasons is because of the meth problem we have in Toccoa. She says it is gutted and devastated. They have entire shopping centers that are completely empty. And a lot of this can go back to the drug trafficking. We've got a real problem, and we can't put our heads in the sand and hope that it'll go away. This is one of the purposes of government, as God defines it. God says the purpose of government is to punish evildoers. Drug dealers and drug traffickers are evil, and they must be punished, they must be stopped. And the purpose of government is to praise those who do good. And we need to do all we can to enforce these laws and to put more teeth in them. I am very thankful for President Trump trying to do a better job of securing our borders. But we've got to stop this drug problem.
As a judge and district attorney, I dealt with crime quite a bit, and from my experience, I can tell you that 90% of the crimes that we dealt with involved drugs in some way. It's a huge problem. One of the solutions that, while I was a judge, as DA and judge, that came up was drug courts, and I started one here in Union County when I first became judge. I look at it as the future of dealing with our drug problem, because a lot of the people that are in there that come into the drug court have lived a life of drama all around the drugs, and they are tired of it and they want to get away from it. Some of them do, and so we want to give them that chance. And our drug court was very successful. It had a religious component with it. We had a group out there that was a religious group that did counseling for people like that. And I give them, as Freedom Ministries, I give them the credit for the success that we had in our drug court. This is the only way. We've got to get, when you get people on drugs, it changes their brain chemistry. You have to get them off of the drugs, clear their brain up, and then they start to see things as they did before they were on the drugs. And then they calm down. Some of them still come back into it, but this is a very effective program, and I believe it's the future of dealing with crimes. And we dealt with mental health that's caused by the drugs. We also dealt with the drugs. And it's a serious problem, and if we could get rid of the drugs, most of our crime would go away.
Okay. Stan, the state is expecting a budget shortfall of over $14 billion as a result of the COVID-19. Since a balanced budget is required by state law, how would you deal with this deficit, and what are your budgetary priorities?
Yeah, I understand they're currently asking for a 14% cut across the board. Back when I was a prosecutor and I was serving on the Prosecuting Attorneys Council board, we had to deal with the Great Recession of the early 2000s. And in that one, we were doing 7% budget cuts, and they were painful. Our budget was mostly salaries. And so the only way we were able to be able to do it was to do a hiring freeze, and we had some furloughs of 1 or 2 days a week for some of the employees that they had to do, and that's how we met it. 14%, I'm not sure how they're all going to do that, but to prevent the disruption of lives, I would try to protect as many jobs as I could in the budget, and find ways to reduce costs. Do the hiring freezes, do the furloughing. Rather than firing somebody, it's better to furlough them for a period of time if you can do that. It's going to be painful to do these 14% cuts, and it could be more. Right before they come back into session is when they're going to get the latest budget numbers, revenue numbers coming in, the revenue estimate, and it could even be more than the 14%. It's going to be bad.
Steve?
Yeah, it is, everything that they're saying is, it's gonna be across the board, 14%. And, it was very interesting. There was a couple of ideas put forth in the, Georgia Budget and Policy Institute that I found very interesting. This is an article written by Danny Canzo. He says state leaders must prioritize long-term recovery with a 2021 budget, and federal fiscal relief is going to be needed. I think it's important for there's going to have to be a little bit of give and take on the across the board 14%, but that is going to be the target number for sure. But the reason why I like that across the board is that we cannot allow large lobbyists and lobby organizations to begin to dictate that their protected territory, so to speak, is not going to be touched. Everything's got to be on the board, and we've got to just make sure that the most fair way to do that and to keep from lobbyists influencing that is to say it's going to be 14%. I thought it was very interesting that Jeff Duncan basically volunteered. He said, "I'm going to go ahead and take my 14% on my salary right off the bat and lead from the front." And so I thought that was very interesting. A couple other things that might, because it's not only cutting expenses, but it's finding additional revenue is going to be the real challenge, because our state is so dependent upon the state income tax. And so, a couple of ideas might be to possibly raise the tobacco tax. Right now, we have one of the lowest in the entire nation. The national average for tobacco is $1.81. Our tax is only 39 cents. So even if we just brought it to the national average, that would generate quite a bit of money that would help our overall budget. The other thing that I'm very concerned about, that I think definitely needs to, this is the opportunity to do away with it, are the tax credits, especially for the film and movie industry. And I'm going on record right now, I will co-sponsor any legislation that would do away with the movie income tax or the movie tax credits. Research has shown that most of that money does not stay in the state anyway because it's being given to people that are outside of the state, and that movie industry really has not generated a lot of long-term jobs anyway. And it's the Georgia taxpayers that are picking up that tab. And here's an opportunity. We're gonna do away with that tax credit for the film and production industry, and let them start paying. They'll still want to operate in Georgia as opposed to a place like California because we still have a lot of advantages of being here. So they'll stay here, but they need to do more of their fair share. And this is an opportunity to let's get them on board as well.
Do you have anything additional you'd like to say?
Well, what Mr. Townsend's talking about is hundreds of millions of dollars, and the scale that we're dealing on is billions of dollars. It's helpful, but it's not going to cure the problem. We've got some serious budget cuts, and you could say this is an opportunity to reduce the size of government. It definitely will do that.
Steve, what is your opinion on term limits?
Well, I am in favor of term limits as far as we have term limits for our governor, we have term limits for the president. It works out very well. The one thing that I am totally against, and most people that I talk to in our district and even across all of North Georgia, people are just sick and tired of career politicians. And it looks like that the only way would be to impose a term limit of some kind of saying, okay, once you've served so many terms, then you are done. Let's get some fresh blood in there. So yeah, I'm for term limits.
Stan?
I oppose term limits. I think it's not necessary at this point. First of all, I don't like the amendment of the Constitution for most any reason, especially one like this. And it's not necessary because we have the power of the ballot. We need to, as responsible citizens, need to be paying more attention to what our congressmen are voting on and their voting records, and then do the term limit at the ballot box. And I think our founding fathers felt that way. I think they discussed it that way. And I take that from some letters that Thomas Jefferson had written. But I believe that they thought about this, and they would have put it in there had they thought it was necessary. If you were to do this, and it's a monumental task to do it, but if you were to do this, I think you hand over power to the bureaucrats and the lobbyists. Now, some people say that they've already got it all, but Congress needs to grow a spine and stand up to them and take those powers back. But this is going to hand power over to them and make the problem worse. In other words, you're handing the government over to the swamp, which is what everybody's complaining about. And these budget cuts are not going to stop the partisan bickering that's going on up there. I mean, if you do term limits, it's still going to happen. You're still going to have this partisan bickering going on that's accomplishing nothing for our country. We need to, as citizens, stand up and take control back of our Congress through the ballot box.
Very good. One last question, and this goes to you, Stan. Are you willing to vote against party leadership on bills that expand government, raise taxes, and run counter to constitutional principles?
Absolutely.
One word.
It's just that simple, yes.
Okay, and?
Absolutely.
Let me add to this. My stance on term limits is against the popular. I know that I'm in the vast minority on that. Most folks want term limits, and so I'm standing up to that, and I can do that in the legislature as well. When I see something wrong, I'm going to let people know about it.
I think we all have survived the debate. No blood anywhere. So I want to thank our two candidates, Steve Townsend, Stan Gunter, for being willing to undertake the incredibly difficult, time-consuming, and costly endeavor of running for public office. I would also like to thank the leaders of the county GOPs for putting this program together: Betsy Young, Robert Lacano, Dina Gooch, and Ed Henderson. I'd like to thank our technical team, and I want to assure everyone that the lapse in the debate had nothing to do with our technical team. It was not their doing at all. And so now we're going to give our candidates their moment for their closing statements. And Steve, you will go first, and feel free to expound on what you think is important. And Stan, you will be second.
Well, again, I also want to thank all the folks that helped put this on, and Stan and I can both vouch for the fact that it was not because of anyone on our end that we did have a little bit of a glitch, but I appreciate them getting us back on track and getting us back on the air. I just want to say that this is a very important time in the history of our country, in the history of even our state. There are many challenges, and I believe that the Lord has prepared me for such a time as this. I'm very concerned about things that have been going on with some of our leadership. I am not tied to anyone as far as if I need to stand up and say no to something, I will definitely do it. Not all ideas are bad ideas. If it's a good idea and if it's best for our 8th district for up here in North Georgia, and it represents the values that we represent and we stand for, and this is why we live here, you can rest assured I will be all for that, to do all that I can to help the people of the 8th district. I would encourage people to go to my website. It's very simple, www.steveforstaterep.org, not .com, steveforstaterep.org. And in closing, I just want to say that there are 4 tests, and this is not original with me. I borrowed this from a very dear legislator friend of mine. But these are 4 tests that I also have adopted, that of determining of whether I personally would vote yes on a bill or no on a bill. And there are simply 4 questions that they have to answer, all 4 of these in the affirmative, or else I'm going to vote no. The first one is it right? In other words, just because something is legal does not make it moral. And I'm going to ask the first question, is this right and moral legislation? Number 2, is it constitutional? That answers most of the questions, many of the things that we've been debating tonight. If we just stick to the Constitution, then it will answer how I would vote. Number 3 is, can we afford it? And this is going to be a very challenging time, not just in the next couple of months, but for the next few years. We are going to have some financial challenges, and we have to be able to ask that hard question. This may be something that we would all want, but can we afford it? And if we can't, we may have to say, not now. And the 4th one is, maybe it is in itself morally right, maybe it's constitutional, maybe we could even afford it. But the 4th question that I'm going to be asking is, is it absolutely necessary? Is it needed? So if it doesn't pass those 4 tests, you can rest assured I will vote no. But if it's what's best for the 8th district and it's good legislation that would help us, then you can take it to the bank. I will be all in favor of that. Again, thank you so much. Visit my website, www.steveforstaterep.org. Again, thank you, Dr. Dan, and thank you again. Thank you, Stan. And it's been a real pleasure to have been here tonight. Thank you.
First, I want to thank the Towns County, Raven County, and Union County GOPs for putting this on and allowing us to talk to the people. My phone number is 706-897-5609. If you have any questions about where I stand on issues or what my campaign's about, or when elected, if you have a problem with state government and you need some assistance, please give me a call at that number. That won't change. As a native of Northeast Georgia, I share the same values that most of you do out there, and I'm available to help you in any way I can. We live in a unique part of the state, and we have a lot to contribute to our state. And for the past few years, we've not had a voice down at the Capitol. You've heard my background and experience. I believe that I'm the most qualified candidate in the race, and I would ask for your vote, and I would be humbled to get your vote. Thank you for listening tonight, and please give me a call if you need some help. Thank you.
Thank you both, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.